Joining us now for more on all of this, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. Kayleigh, thanks for being here.
Good to join you, Brett.
When you hear these leaders in various cities react to what's happening on a federal level, like the Chicago mayor, take a listen.
We are not going to agree to or accept anything like what's happening on the streets of Portland, Oregon. We're not going to have unnamed federal agents patrolling our streets, pretending to be the police, sweeping people off and denying them of their constitutional rights. That is not going to happen in Chicago.
Obviously, she's not alone. The Portland mayor, the Oregon governor. When you hear that, what do you say?
I say this, I met Legend Taliaferro's mom yesterday. Legend Taliaferro was a 4-year-old boy who was shot in his bed, and it was a tragedy, lost his life. And sending additional federal resources to ensure that this does not happen to another 4-year-old, that more children do not die in the streets of Chicago. In a year where we've seen a 50% increase in homicides in Chicago, 414 people lost their lives. I think about Legend's mom, and I think about the responsibility that Mayor Lightfoot is not doing in patrolling her streets and securing her city, and that she should take help and admit that she needs the help of the federal government.
You know, the critics say that this is all an effort to turn the page from the coronavirus. You say?
That's absolutely not the case. This president's been very clear for years that violent crime is a priority. We saw it going up at the end of the Obama administration. As the Attorney General said yesterday, finally it started to come down under President Trump's administration. And now with this defund the police movement, we're seeing it creep back up. This is about protecting the American citizenry, the top priority of this president.
Is the president going to do another briefing today, 5 p.m.?
The president will have a 5 p.m. briefing. There's been extraordinary ratings, as we've seen across all networks, Americans tuning in, wanting to hear directly from their leader. So he'll be out there at 5 p.m. today. He'll do these a few times a week.
You said there's not a shift. The president is now apparently weighing a mask mandate for federal buildings, including the White House. Is that true?
No, I spoke to the president this morning. The president said that here in the White House, we're tested regularly. There's not a mask mandate for the White House. He encourages the wearing of masks. He says it's a good thing to do. He noted it and tied it to patriotism. He encourages mask wearing, but there isn't a mask mandate at the federal level or here on the White House premise.
And there was a cafeteria worker who tested positive?
Across the street in EEOB. So that was across the street. There was contact tracing done, and it was determined that there was no significant contact with anyone over in the Eisenhower Executive Office building.
But you see a shift in how the president talks about it just in the past couple of weeks, right?
Well, I've spoken to him about this privately. He's spoken about this publicly. There hasn't been a shift. Every time I've spoken to him, he has said, wearing a mask is no problem to him. In fact, on March 31st, before the CDC even issued their recommended but not required guidelines, he's on the record saying, if you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. It doesn't harm anything to wear a mask. And that's when several of the medical experts were saying, don't wear a mask before those CDC guidelines came out. So he's always been publicly consistent, privately consistent, and he leaned in with that picture that he put on Twitter in the press briefings recently as well.
He also said that he's comfortable sending his own kids and grandkids to school. He wants schools open. Here he is on the question about a national strategy.
We do have a national strategy, but as you know, ultimately it's up to the governors of the states. I think most governors, many governors, want the schools to open.
Is there a national strategy on school opening?
Yes, and I think you'll be hearing more from the president about that today. He'll be focusing on that in his 5 p.m. Briefing that you'll hear from him on. And look, this president's been clear. We want schools to reopen. You have the CDC director saying it's a greater public health threat for schools to stay closed than open. We know that kids in particular are not affected by COVID in the same way that adults are. And also, I would just point out that on the issue of schools, 1/5 of child abuse cases are identified in schools. They have to open. It's in line with the science, and there's no reason for schools to stay closed, particularly when you have 79% of moms who are full-time, who are employed full-time. So either you're sending your kids to a child care facility if you're a working mom or to a school, and we would prefer a school.
What's happening on Capitol Hill as far as phase 4 of this stimulus? I want to take a listen to the Treasury Secretary talking about what's being negotiated now.
Will there be a payroll tax cut in the bill?
Not in this, but we're going to come back again. You know, there may be a CARES 5.0. The president, again, is focused on money in American workers and American pockets right now.
So I guess the question is the White House getting rolled on what they wanted? You know, no payroll tax cut in this bill, relenting on increased testing for states, even tying federal dollars to reopening schools. It seems like Democrats are getting their way. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't think so. Look, we've always said that we wanted funding for testing in this, but we wanted it targeted, where Democrats just wanted to dump money in a pot called testing, where there's already $9 billion available that's unspent. We wanted it to be targeted. There was $18 billion put forward. The chief of staff told me this morning by us for targeted testing for nursing homes and for schools. So that was our priority always. And our priority has always been clear. This is about schools. This is about kids. This is about jobs. The payroll tax cut is a great win for America's workers, particularly low and middle income Americans. And it's a real shame Democrats don't want to give our hardworking low and middle income Americans a tax cut.
I want to ask you one more thing. You know, the president does these press briefings, and we appreciate them because there's a lot of information in there. And obviously, he takes a lot of questions from national press. Sometimes they're not related to coronavirus or anything else that's pressing right now. But the other day, he was asked about Ghislaine Maxwell, who's being federally prosecuted for allegedly recruiting, grooming, sexually abusing underage girls. He said, "I just wish her well. Frankly, I wish her well." That raised some eyebrows, Kayleigh.
Well, what the president was noting is that the last person who was charged in this case ended up dead in a jail cell, and the president wants justice to be served for the victims in this case, and he prefers this to play out in a courtroom.
And have you talked to him about that?
I have spoken to him about that.
Because a lot of people were saying it just seemed a strange answer, but
and let me know one more thing, Brett. You know, this president is the president that banned Jeffrey Epstein from coming to Mar-a-Lago. This president was always on top of this, ahead of this, noting banning this man from his property long before this case was even being played out in a court of law.
Kayleigh, we appreciate the time and the info, and we will see the president today, 5 p.m. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Brett.